you move us nicely into thinking about assessing the semester. How do we help our students do it? How are we doing it ourselves? How do we want to help our colleagues think about it? This has been very unusual. It has been a most unusual semester, and having a moment, an opportunity to reflect on it is probably an important piece. Todd, you had a nod.
Oh, yes. I mean, I have a couple of things I'd enjoy sharing very briefly. One, one is I mentioned earlier in the chat, really the most meaningful assessment or things that I did in class weren't related to any of the assignments that it was a 0 point assignment in Canvas that ended up being the most meaningful to me. I'd love to share it with you literally in like maybe 30 seconds. So this is from Canvas page. And we have this assignment called "What's Going On? How are you doing?" And it's worth no points. I just said the purpose is to provide a space to share news, thoughts, concerns, anything you want to get off your chest. No obligation to do anything, say anything, whatever. And so I told my wife I was going to do this, and she's like, "No one's going to post anything." So I want to go quickly and just show you. So like I shared some songs that I like, and then the students shared the songs with their parents. They're talking about Bob Dylan. We're let's see here, just go through here. Lots of stuff.
Love it. Look at that.
I was really I was really struck by things like I feel like I've been through a year's worth of emotions in 3 weeks. They're talking about like things that really matter to them.
Hmm.
I had students that talked about they're still working at the grocery store and they have a family that are sick,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
lots of stuff and things you don't normally hear about.
Right.
So I shared some pictures of me as a teacher,
Love that one, Todd.
and then they shared things themselves. I learned things about my students I didn't know about
Hmm.
over the course of the year. But none of this was part of the official curriculum.
Hmm. And yet this will be the most one of those memorable moments. And I also noticed that you were willing to share yourself, right? You put yourself out there. And I want to, I know I keep saying thank you to the team, but I need to say it again because you put yourself out there to your colleagues and really kind of shared your expertise and who you are. And sometimes being a teacher of teachers is not easy. And so it was just lovely to see that happen. So as we're assessing and helping each other to assess, I need to note that because I think it's quite special. Who's next?
Hey, yeah, real quick, Todd. So, fantastic point, right? Here's this semester, at least for me, we had students for half of the semester, kind of, right, in person. And so we build this rapport with students, and then we went offline, right? We went online rather. So I feel like, it was a little bit easier to continue some of what was already built face to face. I worry that we won't have that kind of base that we can rely on as a class.
One of my biggest compliments when because I always teach just fully online, but in the past was a student remarking at the end of the semester that they had more engagement in my class than they did in their face-to-face chemistry class. So, it's just, I think it's what you make it.
Yeah, and putting in the sort of recognizing that the big goal of connecting with your students, whether it's face to face, hybrid, or fully online, is the goal. Now, how you might accomplish that is going to be perhaps different across those different modes. Any other thoughts on tips on helping faculty and students assess the semester?
I've had to think like how different or similar is this for for my classes, and that's because my classes have this semester we're planned to be mostly online anyhow. So it's not really that big of a change in terms of like how I would structure the class. It was all ready to go, and but that didn't mean it wasn't different. And so what I had to think about it at first, I thought, oh, I got this. Class is already set. It just let it roll. But then it became apparent, like within a week or so, I was like, wait a minute, the class is the same, but the students are different. Like they are, in this case, graduate students who are most of the time working in schools in some capacity, either as a teacher or paraprofessional. I was like, their world changed, dramatically. So I then had to really, really think like, how can I ease that workload to get them to where I need them to be in terms of course content, but do so without overloading them, like on trivial assignments. Or I had to think carefully about each assignment. I was like, really essential. I get at this a different way, and I package a couple of things, sort of kill two birds. So I ended up restructuring a lot of assignments, giving them some of the like textbook presentation, like summary slides for each chapter, so that they can get the essential information a little bit quicker, as opposed to having them. Before I would kind of let them struggle with that a little bit because I think that's part of the learning process. But now I had to think, is like, how can I make that struggle a little bit less, because they're facing a lot.
And I love that phrase. The students were different. This was a very different circumstance for them. And
Carol, just going back to what you said, I think one of the big differences for me this semester was most of the time, my class might be the only online class that the student is taking at that time. I had to be aware that all of their classes now, and they were, kind of shuffling between different versions of the online process. So I think that's definitely something to be aware of in case we don't come back in the fall.
I was just going to chime in and kind of second what both Jason and Nancy just shared, thinking about the differences. And so I guess my how do we sort of document what we've done is sort of twofold. It comes from the place of being a pre-tenure faculty member. And so I'm really thinking about that at this moment. And so one is, it's about documenting what we actually did. And so, for me, for instance, I dramatically changed one of my courses in particular, my undergraduate course, from assignments on down. And I at least have a record of that, right? Because it's on Canvas. My weekly announcements, there are things that I can document to demonstrate, right? What I did. And I think that is perhaps one thing that's really important, to actually take stock of what we did that was different in this moment, that responded to the fact that this was a completely different learning experience for everyone. Students, staff, faculty included. I'm not sure how many of us were here for the Spanish flu, or have any memories of it, even though talked about it, right? But perhaps the last time that we've had this level of a pandemic, right? We could talk more about history, but that's not the point. So that's one, like, to actually document the things that we did, right? And then the second part for me is, I'm looking to my senior colleagues to be thinking about how this is very different for pre-tenure faculty in particular. And so, and that we remember that in January and February of next year, or as we're starting tenure and promotion processes for my colleagues who are going through that right now, to be thinking about how that has impacted so many things, not just teaching, but so many things that we're used to having this very normal flow around are being drastically impacted, and we don't know those impacts right now. We have a few of them in mind, but we actually don't really know what this means 3 months from now, 6 months, a year. Like trauma, people who study trauma remind us that like it's not always about the immediate moment. We actually have to be mindful of what happens, you know, years down the line of how people are being impacted by a traumatic moment. And you know, this isn't within my expertise, but I would imagine that maybe we could believe that this was a traumatic moment, and that we won't be able to measure everything right away. And so I'm thinking document what we've done, but also how can we be mindful when we evaluate our peers about this moment and to remember those lasting impacts down the line.